back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we're going to take a look into what would have happened had Sheev Palpatine fallen in love with Jocasta Nu. Does Jocasta Nu change, or does Palpatine change? As two of the eldest and most well-studied individuals of both sides of the Force, how would they interact with one another? Before we begin this video, let's smash that like button, try and shoot for 2,000 likes in the first 24 hours, and I will release What If Anakin Skywalker Was Never Discovered by the Jedi or the Sith. This is a video you definitely do not want to miss. We're also gunning for 50,000 subscribers, so join the Space Gulag if you would be a part of our incredible journey together. If you have ideas for videos, leave them down below. I do read all the comments, but I don't do crossovers. And one last thing, if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon, Twitch, and community Discord. Special shout out to George Story and Benjamin Wells for being grand tier supporters, and Jay Hoffman, Icy Raptor, Derek Williams, and War Pigman 308 as master of the tier supporters on our Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. You guys are funding videos like the video that's coming out next. And if you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, watch to the end of the video and I will show you how. Our story begins inside of the Senate chambers. Chancellor Palpatine is leader of the Republic. He's established an evil plan to wipe out the entire Jedi Order. Sheev Palpatine has secured himself as a reigning power in the galaxy, and was closer than ever to completing his plan. He had all of his steps in place to succeed. Though with the loss of his apprentice on Naboo to the Jedi Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, he was a little bit set back. While Sidious had his sights set on a new apprentice named Anakin Skywalker, Sidious had his own apprentice for the moment, for the political side of a war that he would be beginning to help tear the Republic apart. Palpatine had spent decades creating his plan for galactic domination, and now, while the clone army was in construction, he could finally see the downfall of the Jedi Order within his sights. He could be the first Sith in almost millennia to wipe out the Jedi completely, though Palpatine was the Chancellor of the Republic, and he had to uphold his responsibilities for now. Palpatine, on the other hand, had plenty of locations he could go to where he could work on Sith-related activities. There was one other thing, too. Palpatine loved the studies of the Sith, and of the Force. Palpatine being a Sith Lord meant he had to know everything about the ancient religion of the Sith, and even more knowledge about the Force itself. Sidious was well versed in the Force, and his understanding of it was remarkable. Even for his cruel and evil demeanor towards everything, Sidious loved the Force, and he enjoyed the absolute amazing gift to study it with the ability to perfect it himself. Sidious spent countless years of his life studying the Force, grasping a better understanding of it. The Force was incredible, and Palpatine wanted to harvest every single inch of it he could. As a Sith, it was his responsibility to use the dark side of the Force to gain more power. Though the troubles of being a politician was dealing with the politicians, every single one of them, including the Jedi. Though there was something he loved about the Jedi, and that was their blind ignorance. Sidious littered his Senate office with Sith artifacts, all having belonged to the ancient Sith, and none of the Jedi knew it. It really made Sidious thrilled on how easy he could undermine the people of the galaxy, and the Jedi too. He had no issues playing both sides of the board, and he was already winning with the Trade Federation just having lost their invasion of Naboo only 4 months before. Sidious was annoyed though. He had to meet with the Jedi before he had a massive meeting with the entire Senate. It was the busy life of the Chancellor of the Republic. First, the Jedi would be in to talk about expanding efforts out in the Outer Rim to stop slavery and whatnot, which Sidious would continue to ignore, but act like he was going to do something to keep the people's vote. Anyhow, Sidious kept his eyes peeled across the Republic. He looked out and saw the capital city of Coruscant. It was his, but it would be forever his, as a sinister smile grew across his face. He then heard a buzz at the door, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. He stood up as he walked over to the door, preparing to put on the same show he always did with the Jedi. The old confused politician that didn't understand the ways of the Force. It was a group of Jedi coming in. The Master of the Order, Mace Windu, Eth Koth, Plo Koon, and an older woman he didn't really recognize. Palpatine turned around and walked in, followed closely with the Jedi behind him. Palpatine asked them to carry on explaining what it is that they wanted to talk about because he had a busy schedule and he needed to get going. Palpatine sat back down in his seat as he looked over and saw the Jedi follow him in and sit down across from him. The woman introduced herself as Jocasta Nu. She was a Jedi Archivist, and she wanted to explain to the newly elected Chancellor that there was a cosmic change within the Force. For the Jedi, their view on the Force was beginning to diminish, and she wanted to express to Palpatine what she had uncovered about the Force. While the Jedi never were fond of giving up details to politicians, they thought that with the recent death of Darth Maul at the hands of Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, that the Sith were still present in the galaxy, and they needed to know what to do about it if the Sith returned. Jocasta Nu wanted to explain to Palpatine that because of this weird tick in the galaxy, he should be warned. Palpatine, in his mind, was laughing maniacally. Of course the Force was changing. He was the shroud of the dark side that was about to beset the Jedi into hopelessness and despair. Palpatine jarred away from his mind as he listened in. He assumed it would be at the very least entertaining. The Jedi, in their view of the Force, was manipulated by their code, a code that restricted them from accessing the full power of the Force. Palpatine thought it was very laughable, but someone born into the aristocratic house of Palpatine and killing his own parents at the age of 10 would find just about anything funny. But as Palpatine listened, he really began to get interested. Jocasta Nu had a way with words as she expressed different events through the history of the Jedi and Sith. She reflected on how the Force had changed throughout all these different events, and while Palpatine knew these events like the back of his hand, he continued to be intrigued by her knowledge and how she was able to express everything regarding the Force itself. Her knowledge was expressed with such proficiency. Palpatine was intrigued, and while the other Jedi sitting there listened in, Palpatine became a part of this verbal journey that Jocasta Nu was taking him on. Jocasta Nu continued telling him that with the recent movements in the Force, it would be wise for him to have a personal guard with him more often than not, and also keep his eyes peeled out for the Trade Federation or Techno Union, that they might make a move against another Republic world. She said that when the Force moved out of imbalance, infamous events happened, one of them being the sacking of Coruscant. It could transpire again. Palpatine sat quietly as he kept his attention peeled on her. He thought it was very interesting that a Jedi was even capable of figuring out one of his plans so well. Mace and Plo had never seen Palpatine so interested in a conversation, and while they had only interacted with him once since Qui-Gon's funeral, they just assumed he didn't really care about what they had to say about the Force. After Jocasta Nu explained everything, she told the Chancellor her personal frequency if he wanted her to relay any more information relating to the Force or anything else to him, as she reminded him that those who don't remember the past are likely to repeat it. She of course didn't want another sacking of Coruscant, so she made sure that the newly installed Chancellor had an avenue for help if he ever needed it. Palpatine was greatly appreciative for her relay information, as the Jedi were guided out of his room and Palpatine turned around. Sidious looked back out the window as he walked over to see the city that stood before him as he thought. Something within him felt weird. He never felt this way before. These feelings were unnatural to him. He didn't know what they were, or even how to describe them. It was so odd, having feelings like these. It felt like a trick of the Force or something. Palpatine hadn't ever been interested in anybody, so he wondered if that was what this was. For Palpatine, seeing a woman like her with such admiration was rare, but he truly responded well to those who showed their intelligence, truly. Palpatine would try and forget about this early morning meeting, as the rest of the day had to drag on ahead of him. With more meetings and more senators demanding this or that, Palpatine had to fill the role as shepherd in the Senate. He was getting his job done. He had to make sure the Republic would revote him to become the Supreme Chancellor again in the next election, especially before the war began. As the night sky began to fall on Coruscant, the city lights livened up. It was time for the Dark Lord of the Sith to go and return to his residence. While he hardly used the Chancellor's home, he would go back to it tonight for a dark meditation. His residence was quiet, and he wanted to return to the quiet life for a moment. While he could usually deal with the rowdy senators, he was unable to stop thinking about his morning interaction with the Jedi Archivist. It slightly concerned him that he was seemingly being motivated by attraction to a woman. Sidious hadn't ever dealt with this before. When he was a child, his parents pushed him away and made him go literally insane. While House Palpatine was influential, Sheev killed his entire family when he was 10, and after his journey down the dark side of the Force, it lasted forever. He never had an interest in a woman. He hadn't found a need or any reason to become infatuated or even attracted to anyone. Sidious found himself a place to get comfortable as he focused on all the darkness surrounding him, and he tried to build upon it, upon the hate that he knew so well. He grew and grew as he fell into a darkened hole of his mind. He was searching for the answers as to why he felt so corrupted by this woman. He must have had a thing for intelligence, but there was no way to find out unless he dug deeper. Sidious was becoming a vessel of evil that lay within him, as he searched more and more for the answers of true darkness, the answers that he sought truly. Visions started running through his mind. As they came and went, they went so fast, he couldn't keep up. Sidious felt different emotions and everything was blurry. Either he was struggling with his connection to the darkness, or his mind was clouded. Sidious internally began to panic. This had never been a problem before. He never struggled with the darkness. The dark side was very much so a piece of him, and he of it. Sidious's lack of concentration only began to hurt him more and more. This madness made Sidious reflect upon his knowledge of those who studied the Force for so long before him, the ancient Sith of the past. This was Sidious's strength. He thrived on his knowledge of the past. He sat in meditative state as a wave of fear crossed down throughout his body. He remembered the Sith of the past that changed to the light side of the Force. Sidious couldn't. That was against who he was as a man and as a Sith. He knew that in the past there were many who folded to the powers of the light and of love. Bastilla and Sion were too weakened or faltered when they interacted with a vessel of the light and fell in love with the vessel of the light. Sidious's fear continued rising. He didn't know if he was becoming weaker to the light or if it was just a fundamental mistake on his part. He did know that if he didn't get this under control immediately, all of his plans could fall apart on him. Palpatine decided that he should rest so he could better prepare for his next day. As much as he wanted to get to the bottom of this, he thought maybe he should at least try and get some rest so that it would pass over. As Sidious slept, he had a dream, and he could be heard tossing and turning in his bed in the middle of the night. Sidious let out groans as if he was crying for help himself. The dream was taking a toll out of him. Inside of his dream, he walked through a dark corridor, and the Sith he'd spent an entire life studying were surrounding him, looking down on him. The Sith surrounding Sidious were cursing him, igniting their lightsabers, calling him a fraudulent Sith. Sidious ignited his lightsabers. He swung out, striking into nothingness. He saw the deformed face of his former master ring out from the shadow with his lightsaber. As Sidious tumbled back, Plagueis accused Palpatine of failing the Sith for his insignificant lust of a Jedi librarian. Palpatine jumped from his bed, pulling the closest lightsaber to his bed, and ignited it. He swung into the darkness. He saw nothing, and then he calmed down. And then a hand reached out from around his neck and pulled him back into the wall as he jolted up from his sleep. Sweating and contorted on his bed, he stood up and walked over to a window and looked out over the city. He knew he had to get himself together. As he roamed back to his bed, he collapsed into the dark silence of sleep. Sidious the next day continued the struggle, concentrating. Sidious wanted to try and talk to Jocasta Nu again as an experiment. If he could talk to her, it might help him understand why he was feeling weird or why he was acting as if he was manipulated by an external force. He knew he might have to wait because of the Jedi and how long it took for them to schedule meetings with the Chancellor. But Sidious was still struggling to concentrate. Members of the Senate could tell, and it was distracting when they were trying to communicate with their Supreme Chancellor. After a week of trying to break through this emotional block within himself, he traveled to a secret lair in the industrial sector of the planet. Sidious landed in the hangar bay and walked over to a small altar and began chanting the ancient Sith texts. He tried to break away from his emotional block. Sidious down inside of himself sort of didn't want to let this go. The feelings he had were kind of nice, but he also knew that he needed to focus on his efforts to destroy the Jedi as he began his chant. There was an ancient ritual that would reset the emotional status for a Sith. He knew that if he could do it, he would be able to rid himself from the emotions he had towards Jocasta Nu, if that was indeed driving him. As Sidious read the spell, he lost his concentration yet again, and spoke out the wrong words of his chant, and when he finished the spell, he crumbled to his knees and passed out. Sidious, after multiple hours, would wake up, and he would have a different mindset. He looked around as he felt his mind go numb. Sidious knew something was wrong inside, but he himself didn't know what it was. But he did realize that he was becoming more and more unhinged. The spell must have been wrong. Sidious sauntered around as he dragged himself down to the book and looked. He saw the page next to the dark side spell that he was intending to use and saw that it was a spell of madness. Sidious accidentally made himself a tad bit crazier, and even more so unhinged and very volatile to his own plans. The spell was meant to help the Sith become more vile in their ways, or it was meant to turn Jedi into vile creatures. Meant to use the Force to turn people into unstoppable animals within the dark side of the Force. Sidious obviously didn't mind this boost, but this unhinged madness could possibly make him be ousted from power. Sidious was cold and calculated, and if he wasn't that, then he could very easily jeopardize himself and his plans. Sidious knew he had to get away and put these emotions on the back burner while he focused on his grand plan. Sidious decided that he was going to invite Jocasta Nu for another opportunity to discuss history of the Force. Maybe doing this would help him understand where it was that he was standing in his own mind. The next day, Palpatine did just that. Requesting the Jedi Archivist to his Senate chamber, he knew that this could possibly get him closer to understanding his emotions. But as the meeting time came closer and closer to actually happening, Sidious's heart began to pick up with a great amount of anxiety and excitement. He couldn't actually believe it. He'd fallen in love for a woman, because of her simple intelligence too. When Jocasta Nu arrived, she was very pleasant. While she could be a brute of an old lady within the archives themselves, she was very formal and nice when she talked to anyone that wasn't inside of her archives. She walked into the room and sat down in front of Palpatine and asked what it was that he would like to discuss. Palpatine expressed that he was very enthralled by their conversation from the past week, and he wanted to continue learning. She asked what it was that he wanted to learn about, and so he said he'd love to have an educational discourse about the Force. The two of them began their conversation as they talked about the Force itself. Palpatine contributed as he knew a lot about the Force, but he didn't say enough to make Jocasta Nu think he was a Sith. He made sure she saw it as a normal conversation between two individuals, and Palpatine himself was very much so overjoyed by this interaction. Jocasta Nu, on the other hand, enjoyed the time talking with someone who was so equally knowledgeable in the Force. The two talked on for hours and hours. Jocasta Nu didn't mind talking. She assumed that for Palpatine, he had nothing important to be doing instead. As the hours flew by, it was eventually time for Jocasta Nu to leave Palpatine's office, and so she did. Palpatine turned his seat around as he thought of everything, and he finally understood. He himself was falling for a Jedi, and the Archivist at that. It was hard for Palpatine to admit he hated the Jedi, but there was something so nice to him about being able to just enjoy the pleasantries of talking with an intelligent individual. Jocasta Nu was quite brilliant when it came to her knowledge, and since Palpatine himself was a fine admirer of knowledge, he loved every moment he got to spend with her talking about it. Palpatine would continue to invite Jocasta Nu over to spend time with him discussing the Force itself, while Palpatine was slowly losing his mind over his spell that he casted on himself by accident, and his concentration on the darkness was beginning to diminish. While Palpatine still had his plan to overthrow the Republic, he was slowly losing popularity within the Senate because of his lack of attentiveness towards the Republic itself. Palpatine thought, with his mind being completely derailed by these afternoon discussions with Jocasta Nu, he was struggling with his connection to the dark side of the Force. He tried so hard to reciprocate the darkness, and yet he was struggling for the first time ever. It baffled his mind. He was the most powerful Sith in the galaxy. Powerful Sith the galaxy had ever seen, at that, and now he was beginning to lose his power threshold in the Force itself. He was teetering between light and dark, and he didn't know how to control himself, though for Palpatine, he was giving into lust of his life, and that attraction to her knowledge and intelligence. Jocasta Nu would eventually question Palpatine as to why he kept bringing her to his office to talk. Palpatine admitted that he was interested in talking to her. She asked what he meant by that, and by what he said. Palpatine expressed that he thoroughly enjoyed their discourse together. He wanted to admit that he thought he was infatuated with her, but he didn't have the chance to do so, as Jocasta Nu cut him off and expressed that she hoped Palpatine was talking this as purely friendly encounters. Palpatine's heart shrank as he listened to Jocasta Nu express that she was a Jedi, and while she enjoyed talking to Palpatine, it was specifically platonic and nothing more. Palpatine adjusted himself and said that he understood. Jocasta Nu could sense the tension and the despair through the Force, so, for her own sake, she told Palpatine that she had to go. She had something she needed to do inside of the Jedi Temple. When she left, she felt the tension from inside of herself release as she closed the door behind her. Palpatine went to a mad streak of losing his mind. He had to use every restraint in his body not to go crazy, but he couldn't stop himself. Palpatine waited until night began as he crept his way down into the lower levels. Sidious was pissed, and he was currently losing his grasp on reality, and the heartbreak, of course, didn't help. Sidious stumbled into the lower level clubs, as he didn't hold back. Sidious ignited his lightsaber and cut through civilians, guards, and anything that moved. People could be heard screaming, and those who got close to an exit faced electricity spiraling down their back. Sidious wasn't cold and calculated. He was a mental case without limits on his own power, and he was using his power to make others suffer. As he killed several people, he swung his blade back around the club. He found himself connecting with the dark side for the first time in a month. He was reveling in it. He loved the true power he was feeling, though there was something ultimately wrong. for Palpatine, and that was, in fact, his vision. His long-term goal was falling out of reality. It had no bearing on the world around him, and as he realized, he had no control over it and no ability to take a hold of the plan he spent years of his life trying to create. Sidious would return to his house late at night and begin to focus on summoning the dark side of the Force. He wanted so badly to be back in his former state. The state that he was before he became infatuated with the old brute from the Jedi Temple. Palpatine didn't understand how he could be so weak in this moment. Palpatine fell to the floor and began another meditation. And yet his mind was still clouded. He couldn't control the intention of his vision, and he couldn't do anything to change his impact on the dark side of the Force. He felt lost, and without someone to guide him, he referred to doing what only he could do. He needed to go to an ancient Sith world. The only issue was that he was losing power in the Senate. While he had time to turn this around for himself, only having just been elected, he needed to pull himself together now, before the Senate ousted him from office. The dark side spell he casted on himself was disrupting him and his plans, and while he was unaware of the nature of his disturbances, he did know that he was even more out of balance than any time before in his life. Palpatine decided that he would have to wait until his elongated vacation. Because he wouldn't be able to go to Korriban for only a day, he needed weeks to get back into his focused mind and into his true power. If Sidious couldn't find a way back into the darkness, he held he would lose any bearing for completing his plans. And while the clone army was being constructed, a Supreme Chancellor that wasn't actively trying to pursue a galactic war from both sides of the playing field could very easily disrupt his plan in all to succeed. He needed to wait for at least a year, because of the extended stay on Naboo, and because there would be no way to politically disguise a trip to the ancient homeworld of the Sith, without getting the Jedi worked up about it. He needed to wait. He had to be patient. Personal vacations for Supreme Chancellors were private. They were allowed to go anywhere, with whoever, and the public had no knowledge of where they were going with whoever. So, with a full year until he could get away, he would have to work on restoring balance to himself, and becoming the Sith Lord he knew he could be. While, at the same time, his temporary apprentice Dooku was leading a regime against the Republic's interests. Sidious knew he had to keep up the ruse with Dooku, so that he could continue his grand plan to execute Order 66 and wipe out the Jedi. Though Palpatine would find this excruciatingly difficult, as he struggled to maintain his power that he had vested in himself. While Palpatine was naturally brilliant, the dark side was his master, and it was controlling him, forcing him into a sense of madness. He was losing control of his thoughts and feelings as they began to lose their shape. It was a curse for him. Sometimes he'd be sitting with politicians and nearly draw his blade on them. It would be even worse when the Jedi were there, and while he would love to kill the Jedi, Sidious was too bright to act so recklessly. Though, there was one thing that was keeping Sidious on balance, and that was a slaughter of innocents on the lower levels. Though, there was an issue with this too. Because he had become a frequenter of mass execution in clubs, restaurants, cantinas, and just about anywhere he could easily escape from, the Jedi were now consistently patrolling the underbelly of Coruscant, looking for the lightsaber-wielding maniac who was tearing through people and electrocuting people that came close to escaping. Sidious was a ruthless killer, and now Jedi were on the hunt for him. While it would be a struggle to find him, the Jedi were dedicated to stopping these massacres. Sidious was still losing control in the government. He won decisively a few months before. As the time passed, Palpatine lost everything he worked so hard to obtain, though. He was being seen as a madman with no grip on reality. His office was in shambles, with flickering lights, or sealed in complete darkness. His speeches weren't coherent when he thought they were. He was also struggling with basic functions. Sidious had trouble concealing his eye color and stopping himself from randomly force-choking people. While he could always pass it off without raising his hand to become visible, it was still worrisome. Palpatine also wasn't eating, drinking, or sleeping. Palpatine also had one more issue, and the issue was that everything he thought he was saying, he thought was coherent, it wasn't. In Palpatine's mind, he saw everything completely right, and as it made sense in his mind, it wasn't making sense in the minds of anybody else. Saying everything he needed to say to show that he was still in complete control of himself wasn't cutting it anymore. Because of Palpatine's crazed status as an individual, Anakin began to lose respect for him, and while Anakin was still a young boy, Anakin had little interactions with the Chancellor to begin with. They were now not allowed to interact with each other because of Palpatine's madness. Palpatine knew that everything was going too far in the wrong direction. He tried to find a place to call himself and find security within his mind. He knew that if he could right the wrongs he created for himself, he would be able to fix this. But that would all change when the Senate decided to impeach and remove him from power for being unfit to serve. His rage boiled. He had to keep cool though. He couldn't blow his cover. He knew what he needed to do. He had little power left in the galaxy, as he was ousted from office immediately. Palpatine had one location he knew he could go to, and it was the first homeworld of the ancient Sith, Korriban. He knew if he went there to discover the secrets to finding balance within himself. So, Sidious went to Korriban because he needed to find these secrets. He needed to find the way to save himself from destroying everything he worked so hard to create. At the same time, Dooku knew he needed to get a hold of his master. If he didn't, their entire plan could fall apart, especially because Palpatine was ousted from office. Dooku knew Palpatine was going to Korriban, so he followed him to the ancient homeworld of the Sith. Dooku arrived slightly behind Palpatine, who was mumbling to himself. The words weren't normally spoken. To Dooku it sounded like the words of the ancient Sith dialect. Dooku tried to ask his master what he was talking about, but by this point Sidious had tunnel vision. Nothing around him mattered, and his insanity was driving him up a wall. Sidious couldn't control himself, and it was really starting to get under his skin because of his inability to control his actions. Though the tunnel vision made it worse because he was now becoming unaware of the actions he was doing and how they were affecting the view others had on him. Dooku again tried to get a hold of his master, who continued mumbling to himself, and then it stopped. Sidious turned around, and instead of yellow eyes, his eyes were shot full of red. He growled in a ferocious manner as he contorted his body and shot red lightning into the face of Dooku, blinding his apprentice. Dooku fell to his knees as Sidious's blade flew through the air into Dooku's jaw, cutting him in half. Sidious laughed and turned around as he continued into the cave, mumbling to himself again. This was the tragic error for Palpatine. While of course he had the long-term goal of killing Dooku and replacing him with Anakin, the issue was that Dooku was crucial to the Separatist movement. Sidious carried on though, leaving his lightsaber behind as he continued mumbling Sith dialect to himself. Inside of the temple, he heard the ghosts of the dead and had visions of the past surround him. He was surrounded by the true power that lay within the Force. He listened as they all talked to him, though this was all a fragment of his imagination. The dark side spell he casted on himself was meant to be used on others the Sith wanted to torture, especially very Force-adept Jedi, like a Grand Master, but Sidious's blindness used it on himself, and while it was efficient for dark side users to use the spell on themselves, Sidious didn't want to do that. It wasn't intended, because what he needed was cold and calculated, not very loud and obnoxious. Palpatine would continue to frequent the Temple of the Sith as he started losing his mind even more. As days turned to weeks and weeks into months, Sidious was living off the Force itself, discovering secrets unknown to him before. He hadn't eaten, drank, or slept since he arrived on the planet, and while Dooku rotted outside in the sands, Palpatine was inside, rotting alive. His mind was a chasm, and he was boggled by his own insanity. And then it clicked. His crazies led him astray, away to a planet he didn't know. It was within the Republic, but he was going there because his madness told him of a special location. Sidious took the Sith artifacts that he could find and an altar as he traveled far, far away from Korriban. He found himself in a lush green world, though with his tunnel vision he saw nothing but darkness. He eventually made his way to a plot of land that had nothing around it. Palpatine would again spend weeks working with the Force and trying to manipulate it to guide him through, this time, this moment. Setting up the artifacts around him and fueling the altar with his own blood, he began his rituals. Palpatine's body was on the verge of falling apart. While he was powerful with the Force couldn't sustain a plagued essence like Palpatine for as long as it was trying to. After several weeks of focusing on the Force, a path was created, and down into the bottom of the path was a portal that he could access. While Palpatine had no knowledge of this, he had discovered the world between worlds. Palpatine could see events stringing across galactic history. Some he'd never heard before, others he knew very well. He saw his master being slain in his sleep by him. He also saw a masked skeleton having its mask removed by a boy in black. Sidious kept finding his way through this place, journeying around. Again, Sidious would spend days inside of the world between worlds, until he learned that he could change past events. He knew this as he walked past a portal and watched Maul fall into a massive hole after being cut in half by Kenobi. Sidious watched his former apprentice, knowing that he was still slightly alive. He could feel it in the Force, though the fall would kill him. Sidious reached out his hand and used the Force to soften the fall for Maul. It didn't take a lot of energy for Sidious to do this, but it was enough to save Maul. While Maul didn't react to it, he began to move around, trying to crawl away, looking for a way to stay alive. Sidious then thought, what if he could change his own past? He had lost so much, and while these were the most gathered his thoughts had been since he became infatuated with Jocasta Nu, he knew it could work. Sidious trailed along inside of the world between worlds for days, searching for the portal that led to the past, and then he found it. It was Jocasta Nu, Mace Windu, Eth Koth, and Plo Koon. They were talking as they walked to the Senate building. Sidious knew that he had to do something. The four were talking about their meeting with Palpatine and how they wanted it to go by quickly. Sidious wanted to change this event, but he knew if he was going to change it, he had to do it without removing himself from this world between worlds. He thought, and then he acted as he reached out his hand, as his body started to crumble on itself. If he did this and it didn't work, the legacy of the Sith would die with him. His body couldn't handle the pressure. If he used the Force to do anything through the portal, he could possibly kill himself inversely. He knew it had to be done though. Instead of killing Jocasta Nu, Sidious reached out his arm and focused his everything away from his body, as he used it to snap Jocasta Nu's leg in half as the bone crumbled under her next step. Plo Koon and Mace Windu picked her up as she lay on the ground in pain. Mace Windu told Plo Koon and Eth Koth to get her back to the Jedi Temple. He would finish the meeting with the Chancellor so that she wouldn't have to worry about coming back to the Senate's chambers. Sidious, with his arm outstretched, fell to the ground as it began to wither away. He watched his hand slowly disappear before him. And though this process was extremely painful for Sidious, he turned around in his office chair, and he heard the door buzz, and his eyes rolled back into the back of his head. He stood up as he walked over to the door, preparing to put on the same show he always did with the Jedi. The old, confused politician that didn't understand the ways of the Force. It was a single Jedi coming in, the Master of the Order, Mace Windu. Palpatine turned around and walked in, followed closely by Mace Windu, who was behind him. Palpatine asked him to carry on explaining what it was that he wanted to talk about. For Sidious, he would be able to bring his plan to life in a short 13 years, when the Clone Wars came crashing to an end with the execution of Order 66. As the world between worlds saved Sidious from the worst mistake of his life, he was able to capitalize on a memory he never had. Sidious's tenure as supreme ruler of the galaxy would come to an end at the hands of a boy in a black outfit and a masked skeleton. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to George Story, Benjamin Wales, Jay Hoffman, Warpigman 308, Icy Raptor, and Derek Williams for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this so we can see what if Anakin Skywalker was never discovered by the Jedi or the Sith. I'm so excited for that video. You have no idea. Let's see what if. Let me know down below. I do whatever comes, but I don't do crossovers. Check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon if you want to be a part of the community or support me in other ways. If you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, go down below. There is a doc list. You click on the doc, you put your name down there, and that's all you have to do. Just follow the rules, put your name down there. Next giveaway is July 4th, 2022. Now let's talk about the story that we have before us. Now, obviously, this is a kind of really funny idea, and I think that's the elephant in the room. This is a really goofy story. It is. The thought of Palpatine falling in love with Jocasta Nu. And, well, I could have had fun with this and made her a Sith, or I could have made Palpatine turn into a Jedi. I thought about it, and I really thought about doing one of those two scenarios, which is what was in the intro. I really intended on doing one of the two of those, but it didn't feel right. Something about it didn't feel right. The story itself didn't feel right. So, instead, I said, what if I could turn the story into canon? What if I made it a part of canon, but a canon that we don't know about? I wanted to see if I could turn the story into something that we would know as canon, because technically, this could have happened, and we just never kw about it, because Palpatine doesn't remember it, and the world between worlds changed it. So that's what I did, and I think it leaves a really interesting turnaround at the end. And I'm kind of happy with how it turned out at the end. Is that at the end of the story, it's kind of like, oh, interesting. So technically, I could be watching episode 2 and being like, oh, he actually is reformed. He had an issue and he fixed it. Of course, it leaves way for Palpatine to discover the world between worlds in the future. So technically it does fit between canon because he would never have any knowledge of the world between worlds. It's essentially Palpatine is about to die and he turns around in his office chair as his eyes roll into the back of his head. And I love doing that. That was one of my favorite parts of the story because it kind of like comes out of nowhere. And for those of you that are like listening are kind of like my intended reaction is for you to be like, oh, what? Wait, did we hear this already? Yeah, that was my intention. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is obviously a really goofy idea, and it could have been really done goofily, but goofily, is that even a word? Probably not. But I wanted you guys to get a story out of this, and I wanted you guys to get a story that is believable. Of course, Jocasta Nu is a brute of a woman. She is mean to Obi-Wan. She was kind of a brute of a woman, and she was, you know, a Jedi. She's a Jedi Archivist. She's going to be probably the purest to the code as anybody. And of course, I could change that. Of course I can. I could paint the house that way if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. You can disagree with that or agree with that if you want, but I thought it was an interesting direction to go with the story. And I think it adds an interesting twist, is Palpatine literally losing his mind and going completely insane, and then deciding to fix that, to not go completely insane, and to try and to be who he wanted to be, which was the vessel of evil in the galaxy, to be the Dark Lord of the Sith, and really be the reckoning of the galaxy. So with that being said, I do hope you guys truly enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below. Also, stay tuned. The next video is massive. It's the biggest project I have ever done. It is about 2 hours and 30 minutes long, and I'm really excited for you guys to see it. There's voice actors in it, everything. There's custom art done for it. I'm so excited for you guys to see it. So, with that being said, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.